U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable. But does it? What is it? What does it mean? We say it all the time. Dr. David Malebranche is here to talk to us about the science behind this life-changing scientific fact and message. U equals U. Good to see you, David.
It's good to be here, Karl.
And before anyone goes, oh, how can I trust this David? I don't know who this Dr. David Malebranche is. Let me tell you about him. He is a prominent and well-respected researcher and clinician, and you've been working in HIV for decades. You are also the Senior Director of Global Medical Affairs at Gilead. It's a kind of a big deal, and I do want to point out that any of the views or opinions that David shares with us on Plus Talk today, they are his own, and they do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any of the entities he represents. David, that all said and done, U equals U. What does undetectable equals untransmittable mean?
It means that someone who is living with HIV is maintained on their antiretroviral treatment, or what we call ART, their medication to treat the HIV, and has reached a viral load level of less than 200. It can go as low as less than 50 or less than 20 that we can detect the copies in the bloodstream from the lab test. But from the research studies, it's less than 200. That's the undetectable part. The untransmittable part, it means once you get to that part where your viral load is that low and it can't really be detected in the bloodstream at a level above 20, 50, or 200, is that you are unable to transmit HIV to your sexual partners. We don't have enough as much information about sharing needles for injection drug use, but we do know with sexual transmission, the risk is not 1%, it's not 0.5%, it's 0. So you are 0% likely, if you reach undetectable status, to pass HIV to your sexual partners, even in the setting of condomless sex. So it's a very important notion that's backed by scientific, rigorous studies. The Partners 1, Partners 2 study, opposites attract. Many studies with both heterosexual couples as well as same-gender couples have proven this over years in tens of thousands of condomless sex acts. So you can be reassured that this is not just something that people are pulling out of their arses, so to speak. It's something that is actually backed in scientific clinical studies.
I mean, I was about to ask, how can I trust that this message is true? There's a lot of people in the United States, rightfully so, who don't trust what the scientists say and don't trust what the medical professionals say. How do you sort of break through that a little bit to say, no, look, this is the truth?
Yeah, it's a challenge in this world, obviously, in the day we're in today, with a lot of misinformation, a lot of people that are so-called health experts. I think it's really on us as medical providers, as medical experts, as public health experts, to disseminate the data as widely as possible, and also to put it in ways that people understand. So not just present a slide graph or a bar graph or give a clinical data readout, but actually present a story, talk to people, have someone share a story about how they were in a relationship with someone who was negative if they were positive, or someone who was positive if they were negative, and how even in the setting of condomless sex, HIV hasn't been transmitted, or the partner who was negative never got HIV. I will tell this story. It just came up as you were talking in my head. When I was working at a clinic here in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I'm based, and this was only about 3 years ago, it was a heterosexual couple I saw, where there was a woman in her 40s, maybe early 50s, who was undetectable on her HIV medications, doing very, very well. Her husband was HIV negative, and they came into the visit together and wanted to talk about this stuff. And what was interesting to me was that the husband, who was negative, was very much up to date on the science and U equals U. And he was like, honey, we can do what we got to do. We don't have to use condoms. She was more reluctant, and she said, Doc, I know what the science says, but I'm just worried. And I think we have to separate what the science says and what we can read on papers and through scientific clinical trials, and then the human experience of living with HIV and the internalized stigma and worry and concern that I've got this now. I don't want to be the reason someone else gets it. So I remember having that conversation, and it struck me that the partner who was negative in that case was really gung-ho about not using condoms with sex anymore. He was like, honey, pay attention to the science. Let's go. He was probably, it was a lot of it was self-interest on his part
Sure.
about having more pleasure with their sex, which is something we don't always talk about with sex nowadays. But she really had internalized the message and was concerned about her partner and didn't want to be the one to transmit HIV to him, which is very commendable. But I reassured her. I said, you know what, you can do that, but there are also other options you could do. If you want to use condoms, you can. If your HIV negative partner wants to explore pre-exposure prophylaxis or PrEP, they can. And you all, as a couple, can decide what combination of prevention modalities you guys want to use. There doesn't have to be a one size fits all. I think we have enough options where people can discuss between the two individuals, consenting individuals having sex, and say, this is the approach we want to take to preventing HIV if one of us is already living with it.
Yeah, and I think just listening to that story, it goes to the depths of the damage that the stigma that surrounds HIV does. And to your point, that internalized stigma. You talked about some studies there. You said the partner 1 study, the partner 2 studies. Just break that down a little bit for me. Like okay, condomless sex acts, like how were these studies done to prove this theory?
Yeah, so what they found, and I mean, you have to take it with the caveat that when you're doing research studies on the type of sex that people are having and whether they're using condoms or not, you have to trust when they report it. You're not, as a researcher, going to be in the room with them, watching them have sex and say, oh, wait a minute, you're not putting on the condom. That's the nature of the behavioral research that we've done. You have to have that trust in what the study is doing and what the participants in the study are telling you. That being said, what these studies did was take what we call serodifferent or serodiscordant couples, which is one partner is living with HIV, one partner is HIV negative or not living with HIV, and then followed them along repeatedly and did surveys, interviews to talk about the number of times they had sex, what type of sex it was, whether they used condoms or not, and then followed them along in a periodic fashion prospectively, or meaning moving forward for a long period of time, and counted up the number of sexual acts. So when I say tens of thousands of sexual acts, they went by the report of the partners and what they told them, how often they were engaging in sex and whether they had it with condoms or not. And so when you look at those studies and you follow people along in a prospective manner, like starting at point A and say, if you want to use a year like 2019 and then following someone along all the way until 2024, you're seeing in real time what's happening. And so that's what the researchers did. And that kind of evidence, those kind of trials are the most impactful. They're the most rigorous. They're the ones that you really can place your bets on and say, you know what, this is some good science. And what we're seeing here is actually what's happening.
Yeah, yeah. What about those people out there who say, well, doesn't a message like U equals U only promote, risky and promiscuous behavior? What do you say to that, Doc?
So you're using all the key words, the key stigmatizing and negative words like risky and promiscuous. We're in 2024 right now. We're not really focusing on those words. And anybody that's trying to shame somebody for having condomless sex by calling them promiscuous or risky is problematic. Now, you can refocus what's going on with the wording that you use and say, hey, let's not talk about it that way. There are quote unquote risky behaviors, but the individual may not be quote unquote risky in the way you say it, but really focusing on the fact that a lot of people are already having condomless sex. It's a way that people connect with one each other. And whether you've seen research studies with this, whether it be heterosexuals, same gender couples, or couples that do variety of in between with the number of sexual partners and who their sexual partners are, typically about 1/3 of people will report not using condoms consistently. And so people aren't using condoms already. So it leans into the concept of what we call harm reduction, which means that in the landscape of people not using condoms frequently as it is because they want to be connected with one another, they want to prove that they trust the other person that they're having sex with, which is a very human thing. They don't really have to worry about HIV transmission in those settings. And so it really speaks to the reality that people, whether they're HIV negative or living with HIV, aren't really using condoms anyway. So what we want to do is give them the best tools to protect themselves and their sexual partners as they move forward and live the most pleasurable sexual lives that they were put on this earth to have.
Exactly. And there are plenty of tools out there. Lastly, why is U equals U a win-win?
U equals U is a win-win for a lot of reasons. Obviously, we've talked about the benefits of public health and transmission to sexual partners. It reduces the rate of transmission of HIV. I think on a very humanistic level or person-centered level, it really empowers people with HIV to have these conversations and do reassuring and kind of meet the stigma where it brings it up. And so there you'll see arguments from some people that say, well, U equals U still puts the onus on people with HIV to have this conversation. I see that point, but I don't necessarily agree with it. What I see it as is a tool to reassure and affirm for people with HIV, hey, you're not going to call me infected, and you're not going to label me as infected like I'm some risk to anyone I come in contact with. I'm living with a condition that I acquired, and I am on the medications that's treating that condition. My viral load is undetectable, so I am personally doing well, and I'm not a risk to anyone that I have sex with. So it empowers us to have that conversation with our sexual partners and also make it more of a bi-directional two-way street. I'm taking care of my sexual health. What about you? What are you doing about HIV testing if you're negative? Or if you're also positive, what are you doing to treat your HIV? And if you're HIV negative and I'm living with HIV, what are you, HIV negative person, doing with prevention and treatment of sexually transmitted infections? How about we have that conversation? Have you ever had syphilis? Have you ever been exposed to herpes? Have you ever had gonorrhea and chlamydia? Because if I'm undetectable and living with HIV, you may pose a greater risk to me with regards to STIs than I do to you when it comes to HIV.
Well said, Dr. David Malebranche. I love chatting to you. Thanks for making the time.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That is going to do it for this episode of Plus Talk, where we talked all about U equals U. Remember, if you want, you can like, follow, and share. We're across all your social platforms at Plus Life Media there, and you can check out the website pluslifemedia.com for more information. Until next time, be nice to one another. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.